Hey guys, this is going to be a response video to Robert J Freemantle. He had asked a long time ago, which I'm just getting around to now because I was sick for so long, how did you get into gaming? And I'm going to try to answer that as clearly and openly as possible. So, when I was young, oh man, I think I was like 4 or 5, my stepfather, who was into all types of what he called bookshelf gaming. It wasn't board, you know, you know, game board type stuff like Monopoly or Risk or anything like that. It was other stuff that was different that was coming out. And in the late '70s, there was a mass of these his quoting bookshelf games, and D&D was one of them. Most of them they were war type games, but even D&D when it was marketed, I mean, it could be used as a major combat system or whatever. So he had started playing that game with one of his best friends that he grew up with, that he went to college with, and so my stepfather, my mother, and their 2 friends would get together and play. And I would kind of, when you're that young, when you're like 4 or 5, you're kind of, I was tagged along, and I was always just put into the I could watch the games for a while, depending how they were how they were acting, so I could kind of listen to what was being said and done. But it was really hard for me to really understand the game. As I became slightly older, eventually by the time I was 6, they would let me actually sit and watch the game as long as I was quiet and didn't ask a lot of questions, which I'll be honest, I did. So I think the longest I ever sat within those games was um, was maybe a couple minutes into those games. I think it was probably when the family got together, we used to play a lot of games. It used to be like board games, and it would be like Thanksgiving. You'd have Thanksgiving meal, you'd clean up, you'd talk for a little while, and then we'd all get around the table and just play a board game or whatever, and stuff like that. People don't do that as much as they used to. It surprises me because it's a good way to kind of get the whole family together and keep you together. Well, one of those times we got together, we actually played D&D. It was only a smaller amount of my family. It was only I think it was my stepfather who was DMing. Finally, I got to play, and then my 2 uncles, excuse me, and I think my mother. And I already related what happened in that first game, as I died a couple minutes into the game. I didn't really get to play that much, but I did sit there and listen to it, and it wasn't for another 3 or 4 months after that the family got back together again, and we actually played another game. And this time my mother didn't play, but it was my stepfather, my 2 uncles, and I played. And once again, I died fairly early into the game, but I listened to it more, and when I got done with that game, I convinced my stepfather to actually let me take the books and read them. Because up to that point, I don't think I wasn't I couldn't read very well, especially at 4 or 5. So by the time I was 6, I was able to really look through it and start to read it. Though I don't remember getting very far through the books. I think by 6, I was already creating my own games. I wasn't following the rules of D&D, but I had the books, so I had like the equipment lists and some basic information that I pulled out of the books. But I wasn't really playing D&D the way you were supposed to. We were kind of just making up these Dr. Demento type dungeons, I guess they would be called, where I would just try to kill them. I'd set traps all over the place, and the players would try to go through it, and I would kill them. And so there was that beginning time where I was not only learning the rules, but my parents noticed that I was having a lot of trouble reading, and I was having trouble in school. Those first, between like the ages of 5 and 7 or so, I was reading at a lower level than I was supposed to, and my mother started working with it, and they used D&D as a way for me to. They knew how much I loved it and how much I wanted to know about this world, and there were some times when my mother would read that stuff to me, and then I would sit down with her and I would, read it back to her. So basically, if it wasn't for D&D, I don't think I would be able to read as well as I do now, today. So it's kind of one of those things that helped to propel me, into wanting to learn to read better. And that has affected me throughout my entire life. Um, I don't. I always find myself, if no matter what information I want, if I can't find it, if I don't know it, and I don't know, I'm not going to ask anyone. I'll actually get the information myself. Whether that's going to, back in the day, we used to go to encyclopedias to look at it. Today, obviously I go online, go to Google or Dogpile or Wikipedia or whatever to find the information that I need. But I would have to say it was probably in 1980. Probably was the first time I really started to get the game down. Um, Between 80 and 82, and during that time, I also got all the different the different box sets that come out. And I had started collecting the books on my own. I remember the first book that I ever purchased for myself was the Monster Manual. So I went from having the box set. Trying to remember what it looked like. It actually had the blue cover. It was only blue and white. It was the only two colors on it. It had the wizard and the warrior and the big dragon in the center. I don't know what version that is of it. That's what I had. And then I purchased the Monster Manual was the next book that I wanted because I needed to have a greater list of monsters. Even though I remember my stepfather, when we were at the bookstore, he was telling me you should probably get like the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide or whatever. That would help me more. But no, I remember taking my birthday money and definitely buying the Monster Manual. And then from there, I ended up purchasing all the other books or receiving them for Christmas gifts. I remember getting the Greyhawk gift, the Greyhawk box, and that really showed me how to start making a D&D game, how you create the different kingdoms, and how that natural obstacles like water or mountains would actually affect the size of a kingdom. And a lot of that stuff that I kind of take for granted now that I know I learned during that time, and most of that was from that box set. And I remember getting the other box sets, and I never really delved into them. Never played with anyone who ever got to the Immortals rule, the fifth box set. I never got anyone that even made it to the Masters set. These are all things that I never played, but I had the boxes and I read through them. And then, it wasn't until middle school, I think it was like 7th or 8th grade, where I had moved around a lot when I was a kid, so it wasn't until that 7th grade where I finally met a group of kids who I convinced to play. And then my group just grew. I had like 12 or 13 kids playing it sometimes at the house, and from then, those were probably for me were highlights in my gaming world. As even though D&D was the center point of my gaming, I learned from the other people that there were other games out there, and they had already purchased them or whatever. I remember as a kid playing things like BattleTech or Car Wars, or simplistic games like that, as well as like playing things like Robotech or Judge Dredd or the DC game or the Marvel game, and then so I learned and played a lot of those other games. But for me, just that whole fantasy genre, I would gobble up anything. From once I was old enough to the books, I remember like the whole Lone Wolf Saga books. Those things just totally drew me in. I remember my parents, going back to when I couldn't read well, they would always buy me these books, the Choose Your Own Adventure books, because they knew that I would have to read that book to get through it. I was no way I could start reading the first pages. So I have a gigantic collection of those types of Choose Your Own Adventure books. Lone Wolf and the Wizard ones and all those. I think I have them up in my attic somewhere. So yeah. So that's basically it. I guess I was 4 when I was first exposed to it, and then I think I was actually playing at the age of 6, and then I was seriously playing by the age of 10, where I was actually, between 9 and 10 was when I really started meeting people and playing with other people, not just a few family members here and there. And then by the time I was like 12, I had a group of, say, 15 people that we were all playing together, and I learned a lot. And I can honestly say without D&D now, I wouldn't, who knows? I might have dropped out of school. I don't know. I know that I would have been a different person if I hadn't learned to read as well as I did from doing D&D, and that drive, that want to know all the information that was in those books. It was like it's like a treasure. You might know where the treasure is, but you have to dig it up, and it's that digging it up part is hard work. But once you get that treasure out, you've forgotten all about. As soon as that lid flips open, you've forgotten about the 3 days that you spent digging down 20 feet to get that treasure chest, because the treasures in there are just so important. And that's what I took out of D&D when I was a kid, is that I had to work so hard at being able to read and understand the books, because of whatever reading disability I had. But once I was able to unlock it and read it, it's just opened up a whole new world to me, and I'll have that forever. So that's a good thing. So, Robert, thanks for putting this out there. Sorry it took me forever to put it up, but I guess it's better late than never. Cool. Thanks a lot.